The cabin of Flight 494 was wrapped in a blanket of silence, suspended 38,000 feet above the dark, endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. It was 3:45 a.m., that strange, ghostly hour when the night feels heaviest and the dawn seems a lifetime away. Inside the massive Boeing 777, 236 passengers were sound asleep, wrapped in thin airline blankets, dreaming of their vacations in Hawaii or their business meetings in Tokyo. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic drone of the twin G90 engines, a comforting hum that promised safety and stability. The air conditioning vents hissed softly, and the occasional clink of a galley cart being organized by a sleepless flight attendant echoed faintly from the back. To the people on board, this was just another long-haul flight, a routine journey across the world. They had no idea that outside the thin aluminum skin of the aircraft, they were drifting dangerously close to a restricted military kill zone. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was calm, illuminated by the soft, golden glow of the instrument panel. Captain Elena Vance sat in the left seat, her posture relaxed but her eyes alert. She adjusted the collar of her crisp white uniform and took a sip of lukewarm tea from a travel mug. To anyone looking at her, Elena seemed like a typical airline captain. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back in practical bun, laugh lines crinkling the corners of her eyes, and a framed photo of her golden retriever tucked into her flight bag. She radiated a gentle, motherly warmth. Her co-pilot, First Officer Jason, was a 25-year-old man fresh out of flight school. He was sharp, eager, and strictly by the book. To him, Elena was a safe, perhaps even boring, pilot. He often thought she was overly cautious, double-checking checklists that he had already memorized. Jason respected her, but he assumed her flying experience was limited to smooth takeoffs and automated landings. He had no idea that the hands currently resting lightly on civilian yoke had once gripped the stick of an F-14 Tomcat. He didn't know that the eyes scanning the fuel gauges had once tracked enemy MiGs through cloud layers in combat zones that didn't exist on public maps. He didn't know that 20 years ago, his boring captain was known by a call sign that made even admirals nervous: Viper. The tranquility of the night was shattered in a heartbeat. It didn't start with a noise, but with a flash. At 3:52 a.m., a freak atmospheric discharge, a silent, high-altitude electrical surge known as a blue jet, struck the nose of the aircraft. It wasn't a lightning strike. It was a wave of pure energy. A violent shudder ripped through the fuselage, shaking the massive plane as if a giant hand had grabbed it. The coffee in Elena's cup rippled, and then the world went dark. Every digital screen in the cockpit flickered and died. The flight management computer, the brain of the modern airplane, shut down. The radio, which had been buzzing with low static, let out a high-pitched screech that pierced her eardrums before cutting out completely. The cockpit was plunged into absolute darkness, save for the terrifying, strobe-like flashes of the storm clouds far below. Then, the emergency backup lights kicked in, bathing Elena and Jason in a sinister, blood-red crimson glow. The autopilot disengaged with a loud wail, wail, wail alarm, and the control yoke went heavy in Elena's hands. "Captain," Jason shouted, his voice cracking with instant panic. He grabbed the dashboard as if he could hold the electronics together by force. "We lost everything. The screens are black. I have no attitude indicator. I have no airspeed." Jason's hands were shaking as he frantically flipped switches on the overhead panel, trying to reboot the main electrical bus. Restart failed. Auxiliary power is not engaging. "Captain, we are flying blind." Elena didn't scream. She didn't gasp. Her heart rate didn't even jump. In that split second of chaos, the motherly airline captain vanished. In her place sat a combat veteran. Her eyes narrowed, adjusting instantly to the red light. She set her tea down with deliberate slowness and gripped the yoke with both hands. She could feel the vibration of the plane through her palms. She didn't need a digital screen to tell her what the plane was doing. She could feel it in her bones. Jason stopped. Elena's voice cut through his panic like a knife. It was calm, cold, and commanding. "Hands off the panel. You are flooding the circuits. We have manual control. The engines are still turning. I can hear them. Eyes outside. Watch the horizon. Use the stars. But the transponder, Jason yelled, pointing at the dark radio stack. The transponder is dead. We are invisible to air traffic control. They won't know where we are. Elena knew it was worse than that. Much worse. They weren't just invisible. They were intruders. They had drifted 50 miles south of their corridor to avoid weather, pushing them right to the edge of the U.S. Navy's Pacific testing range. Without a transponder squawking a friendly code, Flight 494 wasn't passenger jet anymore. On military radar, they were now just a fast-moving, unidentified bogey flying straight toward a carrier strike group conducting live-fire war games. They looked like a missile or a hijack weapon. 10 minutes passed in agonizing tension. Elena wrestled with the heavy aircraft, keeping it level by pure instinct. The passengers in the back were waking up, sensing the change in the plane's movement, the whispers of fear starting to spread like a contagion. But the real danger was inside the plane. It was hunting them from the outside. Contact left. Jason screamed, pointing out his window. "Oh my God, look!" Two dark shapes materialized out of the obsidian clouds off their left wing. They were sleek, angular, and terrifying. F-22 Raptors, the most advanced stealth fighters in the world. They move with lethal grace, sliding through the air like sharks closing in on wounded prey. Their afterburners glowed with a faint, menacing violet hue. They were close, so close that Jason could see the rivets on their gray skin. One of the fighters, the lead jet, accelerated aggressively. It pulled up right alongside the cockpit window, just 50 feet away. Elena looked out. She could see the pilot. He was wearing a dark helmet with a black visor, faceless and robotic. He flashed his navigation lights rapidly. Flash, flash, flash. Then he rocked his wings violently from side to side. "That's the intercept signal," Jason whispered, his face draining of color. "He is telling us to acknowledge and follow. If we don't, he shoots." "I know the signal, Jason," Elena said softly. She tried to bank the plane to acknowledge, but the hydraulic pressure was low. The massive Boeing 777 was sluggish. It groaned and resisted the turn. To the fighter pilot watching, it didn't look like a struggle. It looked like refusal. It looked like the airliner was ignoring the order and continuing on its suicide course toward the naval fleet. In the cockpit of the lead F-22, Lieutenant Commander Rick Razor Mitchell stared at his heads-up display. He was 30 years old, the top gun of the squadron, and he had zero patience for civilian incompetence. His radar warning receiver was showing the target as non-responsive. "Kingpin control. This is Razor 1. The fighter pilot spoke into his oxygen mask, his voice crisp and professional. Target is a heavy airliner type. No transponder. No radio contact. Target is ignoring intercept signals and is on a direct heading for the aircraft carrier USS Gerald Ford. Time to impact is 3 minutes. The voice that crackled back from the aircraft carrier was gruff and tense. It was Admiral Vance, the fleet commander. "Razor, we cannot take chances. If that plane is hijacked and loaded with explosives, it could take out the flight deck. You are authorized to fire warning flares. If they do not turn immediately, you are weapons free." Razor's thumb hovered over the weapon selector switch on his stick. "Copy that. Kingpin. Arming heat seekers. Let's see if this wakes them up." Back in the airliner, a blinding burst of light erupted off the left wing. The F-22 had fired a magnesium flare. It burned with the intensity of a dying sun, illuminating the terrified faces of the passengers in the cabin. Screams erupted from the back. The plane shook from the shockwave. "They are firing at us," Jason yelled, unbuckling his seatbelt in pure terror. "Captain, turn the plane. Turn it anywhere." "I can't." Elena gritted her teeth, wrestling the yoke with both hands. "I'm fighting the hydraulics. If I turn too hard at this speed without the computer assist, I'll stall the wing and we will spin into the ocean. I need to slow down." Elena looked out the window at the F-22. She saw the missile bay doors on the fighter's belly slide open. A chill went down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold air. She recognized a maneuver. The fighter pilot was positioning himself for a Fox 2 shot, a heat-seeking missile straight up their tailpipe. He had decided they were a threat. He was going to kill them. Elena closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. She breathed in. In her mind, she wasn't in a Boeing 777. She was back in the cockpit of an F-14 Tomcat. 25 years ago, at the Navy Fighter Weapons School in Miramar, she remembered the lessons. She remembered the psychology of a fighter pilot. A fighter pilot chases speed. Her instructor had told her, if you want to confuse a shark, you don't swim faster. You stop. She opened her eyes. The soft, motherly look was gone. Her eyes were hard as diamonds. Jason, Elena said, her voice surprisingly quiet. Hold on to something. I'm going to show this kid who is flying this bus. What are you doing? Jason gasped. I'm hitting the brakes. Elena said. She did the unthinkable. At 400 miles an hour, Elena slammed the throttles back to idle. Then she grabbed the speed brake lever and ripped it back to the maximum setting. Giant panels on the top of the wings popped up into the airstream. The effect was like hitting a brick wall. The massive airliner shuddered violently. Passengers were thrown forward against their seatbelts. The luggage bins rattled. The sudden deceleration was brutal, but it worked. The F-22 pilot, Razor, was following close behind, locked on and ready to fire. He expected the airliner to keep moving or turn. He did not expect it to stop. The sudden loss of speed by the target caught him completely off guard. Whoa! Razor shouted, yanking his stick back. His fighter jet screamed past the airliner, overshooting it by hundreds of yards. He flew right in front of the 777's nose. His missile lock broken instantly. What was that? Razor's wingman called out over the radio. Did you see that maneuver? That was a tactical deceleration. A civilian autopilot can't do that. That was a Cobra maneuver in a jumbo jet. Elena leveled the plane out at 15,000 feet. She was sweating now, her arms aching from the physical effort of controlling the beast. But she wasn't done. She knew she had bought herself 30 seconds of confusion, but the fighters would circle back. She needed to talk to them. The radio was dead, but she had lights. Jason, find the landing light switches. Elena barked. Now! I have them, Jason said, his hand hovering over the overhead panel. Flash them, Elena ordered. Not SOS. I want you to flash a specific rhythm. Long. Short, 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 long. Do it. Jason didn't ask questions. He flicked the heavy switches. The powerful beams of the landing lights cut through the darkness. Flash, 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 flash. High above, Razor was banking his F-22 around for a second pass. Angry now. Kingpin. Target is maneuvering aggressively. I am re-engaging. Wait, his wingman interrupted. Razor, look at his lights. He is signaling. Razor looked down. The airliner was pulsing its lights in a rhythmic, deliberate code. It wasn't the frantic flashing of a panicked amateur. It was precise. It was Morse code. Razor's brow furrowed under his helmet. He read the code. V-I-P-E-R. He froze. He read it again. V-I-P-E-R. Control, Razor said, his voice trembling slightly with confusion. Target is signaling a call sign. It says, Viper. On the bridge of the aircraft carrier USS Gerald Ford, Admiral Vance was standing over the radar screen, ready to give the final kill order. He was a hard man, a man who had seen war. But when he heard that word, the color drained from his face. He dropped his coffee cup. It shattered on the metal floor, spilling black liquid everywhere. Did you say Viper? The Admiral whispered, grabbing the microphone from the comms officer. Affirmative, sir, Razor replied. Does that mean something to you? The Admiral closed his eyes. Memories flooded back. 20 years ago, a training exercise over the Nevada desert. He was a young hotshot pilot then, undefeated in simulated combat, until he went up against an instructor named Elena. She flew circles around him. She humiliated him. She was the best pilot he had ever seen, a ghost in the air. Her call sign was Viper. She had retired mysteriously to raise a family, vanishing from the military world. He hadn't heard that name in 2 decades. Razor, the Admiral barked, his voice cracking with emotion. Disengage. Repeat, disengage immediately. Safety's on. That is not a threat. That is Captain Elena Vance. She is a legend. She is one of ours. One of ours. Razor asked, stunned. But, sir, she's flying a bus. Son, the Admiral said, a small smile touching his lips. That woman could fly a brick and make it sing. If she performed a tactical deceleration on you, you should be thanking her for not shooting you down, even if she doesn't have guns. Escort her in, guide her to San Diego Naval Air Station, and Razor, show her some respect. The change in the sky was immediate. The aggressive, predatory posture of the F-22 Raptors vanished. They stopped circling like sharks and slid into a protective formation. One jet moved Elena's left wing, the other to her right. They were so close, she could see the pilots looking at her. Razor, the lead pilot, raised his gloved hand and gave her a slow, crisp salute. Inside the cockpit, Jason slumped back in his seat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at the fighter jets, then at his captain. Elena was calmly sipping her tea again, though her hands were trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. Captain, Jason whispered, staring at her as if she were an alien. Who are you? How did you know the Morse code for Viper? How did you know how to make a 777 do a brake check? Elena looked at the young man. The hard edge in her eyes softened back into the motherly warmth. She patted his shoulder. Jason, before I flew people to their holidays, I used to teach young men like him. She pointed at the fighter jet, how to stay alive. Now, let's get these people on the ground. I think I'm going to be late for my dog's dinner. The landing at San Diego Naval Air Station was rough. Without flaps or fully functioning air brakes, Elena had to bring the heavy jet in fast. Too fast. It was 4:45 a.m. when the wheels slammed onto the concrete. The tires screamed, smoke billowing from the rubber as she stood on the brakes. The plane shuddered and groaned, using every inch of the military runway before coming to a stop just feet from the gravel runoff. Fire trucks raced toward them, sirens wailing. But there was no fire, just a silent, dark airplane, and 236 passengers who had no idea how close they had come to being a headline on the morning news. As the sun began to rise over the base, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, the passengers were led off the plane. They were confused, tired, and scared. But as Elena walked down the stairs, followed by Jason, a black military SUV pulled up. Admiral Vance stepped out. He was older now, his hair gray, his face lined with the weight of command. But he walked straight up to Elena. He didn't say a word. He simply took off his hat and hugged her. You haven't lost your touch, Viper, the Admiral said, his voice thick with emotion. You scared the hell out of my best pilot up there. He thinks he saw a ghost. I was just keeping the skies safe, Admiral. Elena smiled. Just like you taught me. Behind them, the young F-22 pilot, Razor, walked up. He was holding his helmet under his arm. He looked at the civilian airliner, then at the gray-haired woman in the polyester uniform. He looked at her with a mixture of confusion and awe. Ma'am, Razor said, standing at attention. I almost fired. You were dead in my sights. How did you know I would overshoot? Elena looked at the young pilot. She saw the arrogance, the skill, the fear. She saw herself from 30 years ago. Because, Lieutenant, Elena said softly, you were hungry for the kill. You were flying too fast because you thought I was prey. Never underestimate a target just because it looks slow. She paused and winked. And by the way, your approach angle was sloppy. We'll talk about it in the debrief. Razor's jaw dropped. Jason, standing behind them, finally laughed. It was a nervous, hysterical laugh, but it broke the tension. That morning, the passengers of Flight 494 didn't just walk away from mechanical failure. They walked away from a war zone, saved by a secret history that had been hidden in the cockpit. As Elena Vance walked toward the terminal to call her husband, the two F-22 Raptors took off again, Their afterburners tearing a hole in the sky, dipping their wings one last time for Queen of the Skies.